Hey everybody, it's Brian Burrs. Welcome to this episode of the B2B Revenue Leadership Podcast. Today we got an episode talking about a startup in Fintech. We haven't had a Fintech leader on maybe once or twice before, but this is kind of an early stage startup where the person had come out of sales, had a lot of success, went into venture, and now is in a startup mode and growing. So we're going to go through his story. Chris is going to join us and is going to tell us how he's done it, what he's learned through the process, and how he plans to grow his company. But before we get into it, I want to make sure you check out my website at b2brevenue.com. And if your team is not crushing it, if you do not have a full pipe, are they booked a month, 6 weeks, 8 weeks out? Then you need start the conversation, get the meeting, an organic, natural way of starting conversations and getting those meetings that are so hard. Because guess what? You know, what everyone else is teaching, it used to work. It did. I don't blame them because it worked for them when they were in sales 20 years ago. And trying to learn from a failed SDR is not a good strategy. What you got to do is learn from somebody who's crushing it today. Business is growing 300% here at B2B Revenue, and it's all because I took a step back and I asked myself, why isn't this working? And I broke it down and tested it over and over again. And it's been working for over 50 companies right now. I've taught it in person. Now I want to do it all online. And it's super easy to learn. Anyone can do it. Anyone can automate it. And everybody on both sides feels it's organic and natural. So please go to B2B Revenue. You can pick a time on my calendar under training. I've got a calendar link there. We can have a 15-minute discussion about your situation, what you're trying to accomplish. Because it's not just meetings you want. It's not just deals you want. It's not just state of mind and a big commission check is what you want. What you want is a happy little life. So that's what I'm here to help you get. Before we get in the interview, I want to make sure you're checking out discoverorg.com. I'm going to have Katie, who's probably the best CMO out there right now. If you don't know Katie at Discover.org, definitely connect up with her. Follow what she's doing. She's really just crushed it there. And I'm going to have her on the show probably within a week. And we're going to be talking about how to sell to marketing leaders, which I need to learn, and what they're up to, because they've got all this great new data, but also in-market capability and information about all the people that your reps need to get in touch with, whether you're on the marketing side or the sales side. So discoverorg.com. At the end of this, I'll sum up what I've learned from Chris. Hey, Chris, thanks for joining us today. As a way of getting started, tell us about yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Brian. Thanks for having me. I'm Chris Palmisano. I got started professionally as a Marine Corps officer and then spent some time in both healthcare and enterprise software in business development and sales roles. And then today I'm the Chief Revenue Officer and Chief Operations Officer at Rocket Dollar. Rocket Dollar is a fintech startup based in Austin, Texas, and we help people invest retirement money into alternative assets. So say you wanted to buy a real estate property or become an LP in a fund or do something in the alternative space, you would come to us and we would set that up for you.
Cool. So how do you go from Marine to IT sales? Is that an unusual transition, or?
I don't know if it's unusual. I think it's becoming more common now. Yeah. I made a transition by way of a headhunter that specializes in placing military folks into corporate America, and sales has always been a good path for military folks. Believe it or not, we do a lot of complicated things in the military. You're constantly pushing towards a mission, evaluating processes, and trying to achieve an objective, which at a high level anyway is actually very closely aligned to sales. Where in sales we're striving to hit a number, or striving to hit a quota, or strive towards some sort of metric. They actually align quite nicely. So I was happy to learn that, having made my transition, and now I've actually spent the bulk of my professional career in some sort of sales or business development role.
Yeah. I think it's a great transition. Both sports seems to be a natural evolution, and the military. I had worked with an Army major when I first got into sales, and it was just that discipline, the structure, like you said, the process, and also kind of the thick skin, the ability to take feedback.
Sure. Yeah. Which we get a lot of in sales, right?
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, the military actually is very good for that. It's one of the only places where you might get instant feedback. You can literally see the results of your decisions on the spot, and that can be very helpful from a developmental perspective, both in the short term and in the long term. Especially if you learn how to act on it without taking it personally. And then when I went through sales training, I went through one of Sandler's programs, the year-long leadership program, and they got really, really deep into the psychology of talking about identity versus your role. And that's actually something that I needed to spend a lot of time on and really think about and really learn. And it's actually been extremely helpful when you can learn to take feedback without letting it impact you personally and just realize it's about the role that you're playing. You can get much, much better, much quicker. So that I always thought was very interesting too.
And I bet you've seen a lot of changes in sales.
Yeah, I think we've seen quite a few changes. Probably the most punctuated change, I think, has been the ceiling that's rising on the type of deals you can do from the inside and how inside sales has changed. I think that's one of the primary changes we've seen, as well as the evolution of the technology stack. And so now there's an entire sales stack. And one of the first hires at the new company that I'm at was a sales ops guy. Like, I needed somebody in the door that could help us think about that and put the systems in place from the foundational level. And that as we figure out what's working, make sure we have the right systems in place so that things can continue to scale. And so I think that's another change that we've seen. And then it's just there's a few others that I think that are really, really important. How we sell and how fast we adjust and how fast we learn. And there's so many new ways to do digital marketing or marketing on the front end. I don't think anybody can really know them all, but the interaction between sales and marketing has to change. The alignment, we really have to nail that in any sales organization now. And then I would argue the same thing on the back end. So sales and customer success, that needs to get nailed and aligned really, really well too. Otherwise, we risk losing those customers that we just brought on. And in today's world, some of your best revenue opportunities are going to come from existing customers, probably more so than ever before.
And so what are you up against now? Is it just a new concept and a kind of a new market space and how to get the word out?
Yeah, so some of our challenges, I would argue that I try to think about things from the customer journey perspective. And so in this case, for Rockefeller, our customer journey would include awareness. So we need to make people aware that this is a thing that they can even do, and that there are firms out there specializing in this and that can help them, they can help customers make this transition possible or invest this way. And then the second phase, or if you want to think about it the way HubSpot does, from the chevron perspective, the first chevron is that awareness. The second chevron is the education. So what do I do? How do I do it? How do I get comfortable with a provider who's offering this type of service? And so that's what we're up against now, which is something brand new. It's been around for a very long time, though. Well, the way we're doing it is brand new, but the concept's been around for a very long time. And so getting the market aware and then getting customers or prospects to the point where they're educated enough to take action is probably the biggest challenge. And there's a number of old stodgy firms in the space which we're also working, trying to work through.
And so have you developed a go-to-market strategy yet, or is it still in the planning stages?
No, so we have a go-to-market strategy. We're selling the product online. We're selling it over the phone with telesales. We also have a number of partners that we're working with from a distribution perspective. And so we have a referral partner program, and then also we've built some APIs. And so we're starting to bring on partners from an API perspective so that they can use the APIs to do account opening, to do account funding, to fund different investment opportunities. And so we've gone to market on several fronts, both with the online sales channel, telesales, and then through partners, and now the API.
And on the telesales side, what are you looking for in people to hire? What characteristics, what skill sets?
Yeah, that's a great question. And actually, you hit it right on the head when we first got on the phone. Like, I've always had great success with sports veterans or athletes. So people that they were competitive in high school or college, or military experience has always been very good for us. And then in this particular type of role, something else that would probably be very beneficial here is to have some experience with financial services or financial products. even if they're not the products that we have or that we're selling. Learning to talk about those, or learning to to understand the type of questions that prospects are going to ask over the phone, or that customers are going to ask once they come on board, can be very beneficial.
And how long does it take to ramp them?
Yeah, so right now we're looking at around a quarter-long process where we would outline what happens week by week, so a company orientation, and then a developmental plan that we put together. We've got a couple online courses we can have someone take, as well as a couple of books that have to be read. And this would all be guided by a manager. And then they would expect some listening in on calls and some call shadowing. And then we would put them live on the phone somewhere halfway through that time. And then by the end of the quarter, we'd expect them to be able to take some calls.
Cool. And you didn't bring up college education. Is that a prerequisite, or is it just an option?
To me, I look at it as just an option. It's not necessarily a requirement all the time. And for these particular roles, if somebody has the right skills, you could go out and get certifications and get all the right skills for this type of job.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't necessarily be a requirement, although we tend to see the vast majority of applicants will have a college degree.
Cool. And what challenge? I don't know if you've gotten far enough to find mistakes or corrections yet in your hiring process and training process, or is it too early?
Yeah, it's still pretty early. So to get started, really, we did go after industry veterans, so people that had direct experience either at a competitor or in a similar space. And so I've got a couple of people that are in this type of role now. And they're actually more focused on the partnership end, and we're now working through the sort of the inside sales, telesales type of setting, and figuring out really what works and what doesn't work before we really hit the gas and try to scale. But to get started, we did focus on some people with some direct experience, having done something very, very similar, just so that we could hit the ground running. And when you're in the startup, there's a lot of other dynamics at play, which is the budget and what can you afford to do, and what sort of promises can you make to employees. So we took that into consideration, and the best move was to get some folks in the door that already knew what they were doing, so that we could put that foundation in place, master our craft, so to speak, before we began the process of really starting to scale. And I think as we get bigger, it becomes easier to bring in salespeople with different backgrounds and then train them. But in the early days, I think you do need to get some folks in the door with some real on the ground or boots on the ground experience.
And on the cold outbound, who are they trying to contact? What's the typical profile of the person in the company?
Yeah, so we're not doing a ton of cold outbound.
Okay.
And so our outbound today is mainly email based.
Yep.
And so we actually look for lists of consumers who have gone through interesting life events that would put them in a particular like income scenario where they'd be a good prospect or a good customer for us. And then on the B2B side, where the partnership, where the reps that are working on partnerships, we tend to focus on like digital investment platforms or other types of like real estate professionals and other investment issuers and investment sponsors. And so they're calling on usually the heads of those firms or anyone in a leadership role in one of those firms that's focused on the investment side or focused on working with investors. And then we present a value prop to them that helps them raise more money faster, which is a great value prop. They understand it almost right away. And so we're, working through each one of those.
And do you see yourself moving in full time into the chief revenue officer side, or?
Yeah, so that's a great question. We were trying to sort out the right title when we all agreed to come work together.
Yeah.
And in this type of business, so I look at the revenue operation and operations itself as almost one and the same. And then in this early stage of the company, like you're out pitching investors and you're recruiting advisors and recruiting board members. And so the CEO generally does that alongside, one of the founders or one of the other executives. So the way we break it up is Henry Yoshida, who's our CEO, handles most of that, and then I'm his backup, and then I handle a lot of the operational aspects of the company and the revenue operation, sales, and then the post-sale operation. And then when I need backup, he backs me up. And so that's how we've tackled it thus far.
And how do you like the management side or the leadership side versus the execution side?
I actually like doing both. It's actually interesting to see how these things happen, because literally everything that happens at the leadership level impacts sales and impacts the sales organization. And it's a mystery to sales reps where the quota comes from, right? But when you're the chief,
yeah,
and quite often, right? Like we're always going, hey, where does this number come from? Does somebody just stick their finger into the sky and pull out this number that I have to go hit? But now I know exactly where it comes from, because the CEO sits down with board members and investors and says, here's the growth rate, here's where we need to land, here's your business model, here's a really complicated spreadsheet where it all shakes out. Here's how much revenue we need to bring in next year. How many salespeople do you have? What territories are they in? And then you start to piece in where you think the revenue could come from, and then you look at the pipeline and say, here's a reasonable quota. Yeah. And having seen that process full circle now, makes it a lot easier, I think, for me to now go to explain to someone why their number is what it is. And I didn't always have that insight. And so now I'm at a different point in my career where I've seen it come from the other side or come from the top, right? And so that's actually been a very interesting experience for me.
It is. And, I've spent most of my time as a rep or a first-line manager, and, it is kind of a mystery, everything from being, the first salesperson at a company, and it's just, this is the most we can pay for this amount of revenue, as opposed
Correct.
to the market has any idea that there's a demand or an interest or an ability to sell that much. And I think today it's a hot topic because, less than 60% of the reps are making their number. And, when I would go on site to companies to help their team sell more, you'd constantly hear that the quotas were way overassigned. And I don't think that helps.
No, I don't think that helps, certainly. You hear this comment from sales reps all the time, like if any other profession had the level of accuracy or success rate that we did, that industry would fall apart.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, could you imagine if only 60% of lawyers could get to court on time?
Right.
Or only 60% of surgeons knew their way around the anatomy of the human body?
Yeah, 60% of the planes land.
Right. Yeah. I mean, nobody would tolerate this. They'd be protesting in the streets. Yeah. So we have to figure out as a profession, where are we going wrong? And now I'm paying very close attention to this process as I go through it with the very early stages of a new company, with the hopes of being able to talk about it on the back end and how to do it well and how to do it right. It's similar in vein to how the team at HubSpot, the team at HubSpot I love, and the book that their former CRO wrote, the Sales Acceleration Formula, has also been very helpful for me. Our model's a little different, but there's a lot that can be learned, or a lot of lessons that can be gleaned from that experience and that book in particular. But this is something that I'm paying very close attention to. And in the early days, so for right now, for individual salespeople, we're looking at a bounty. And so for every deal closed or every new customer brought on board, we're willing to pay X amount of dollars in the commission, which is probably the right way to go very early on. But as we progress, I think there's different ways to do that, and we may end up making a lot of changes to that.
And that's it. And I've seen companies really ruin the sales force, even successful companies, but what they end up getting is services people and not salespeople, people who are willing to comply with the comp plan, because very few are maxing it out. And I would think in your situation where you need experienced people, they need a comfort level that the number is real and that the opportunity is solid.
Correct. Yeah, I actually agree with you quite a bit on that. There should be some rules of thumb around quota setting, right? Like if you hand me a comp plan and it's 6 or 7 pages long, what am I going to do? I'm going to spend most of my time trying to figure out the comp plan instead of spending most of my time trying to figure out how to actually work with customers. And then salespeople are people too. And it just seems like so many people forget this. Like they've got mortgages and they've got families and they've got commitments and they've got a budget at home. And to make it ridiculously complex, all that does is hurt your sales organization or hurt your revenue function. And every business, of course, needs revenue. So finding that right alignment, finding the right mix, that's absolutely critical. And a lot of us do end up shooting ourselves in the foot at the leadership level by putting together something that either the reps don't understand or that doesn't make any sense or that isn't grounded in reality. And so again, I'm very, very aware of that, having come up through the ranks. And I want to make sure that I don't put any system in place that does that here.
And it's one of the more complex things because a lot of companies are moving to 6-month plans, and that seems more focused on minimizing upside rather than maximizing it.
Yeah, and they may be doing that because now CRM has evolved to a point where every deal is in the system.
Yeah.
And so they have good visibility, maybe for the next 6 months. And so they're trying to, but they are to some extent trying to minimize the upside. And I get it. You do want to run the business very predictably, but at the same time, you do want to allow for salespeople to have an incentive compensation structure that does push them to go and outperform.
Because with your product, it's probably an education challenge and a noise challenge. There's, in the fintech space, there's like every technology space, there's a lot of players, a lot of options, and people don't have the attention span to find all the distinctions. So it's up to the rep to really hound on those and really elicit the understanding from the customer on that. And if they're not incentivized to do it, they'll just go through the motions.
Yeah, correct. I agree with you. And so we want the reps to really, really be able to dig in and understand the customer scenario, the prospect scenario, and to be able to explain the value prop that we offer, how the pricing is different, why we set it up that way, and to be able to make a recommendation on one of the two products that we offer, and communicate the value prop in a way that's both persuasive, but at the same time going to help the customer. And the good news is we do know the landscape pretty well. We do know the other players in the space, and we know what we offer, and we know that it's valuable. But having that conversation properly and doing the education properly is absolutely critical. It's everything. It's everything in this type of scenario because you're asking people to trust you with their money.
Yeah, the second most important thing.
Right.
Next to their health, I guess.
Well, I would hope that's the priority. Yes, I would hope that's the priority.
Depending on what time of the month it is.
Sure.
But I mean, is it revenue that's most important, or is it logos, or is it some mix of that?
Yeah, great question. So for us, it's both. So we do have a B2B channel, and the B2B channel, of course, logos are important, but hitting the ground running, and actually making a really lasting and a measurable impact on partners is really important. And this is something that's actually very measurable. They can see we're either bringing them customers and bringing them accounts, and that's working, or it's not. So for us, the revenue is important, but the logo is important. And then on the consumer side, where you're actually signing up individuals, yes, it's revenue, but it's a lot of other things too. It's getting the account up and running properly. It's building trust with the customer. We deployed feedback surveys almost immediately after rolling out a support system for customers after they get through the sales process. But in both of which are extremely important. You want them to have a good customer experience or a good prospect experience as they're in the process, and then a good customer experience on the back end. And even if the surveys very early on, I put less stock in the actual number that's coming out of the survey, but directionally they can be very accurate. And so those things all matter, and we survey those things, and I want to make sure they're having a good experience as well, because word of mouth here can be extremely powerful as a second or a third order revenue opportunity. And so that's something that we're really, really focused on, both the experience while they're in the funnel, so to speak, and then once they are a customer also.
And have you learned much about how different this sale is versus the other things that you've sold in the past? Is there much difference?
There is some difference. So when you're selling a product to a consumer, it's not like selling complex software to an organization.
Yeah.
So sales cycles are very different. So we tend to have a process where 2, maybe 3 meetings or quick calls with a customer, and we can get through the vast majority of what needs to be communicated. Whereas if you're selling complex enterprise software, you might have 12 months or 18 months.
Yeah.
Actually, we do have partners that we're working with that are banks, and working with a bank, it's 18 months before you can expect to get anywhere in most cases. And so on the consumer side, yes, those conversations on that process can move a lot faster. Whereas on the B2B side, when we're talking to banks or when we're talking to investment platforms or investment sponsors, now we have a real B2B sales cycle, if you will, yeah. or partnership development cycle. And by partnerships, I mean, we offer them something of value. They offer us something of value. Let's figure out the right way to work together, put the right structure in place, and then execute on it, which itself is a type of a sales process, but each one is somewhat unique. So what we're not doing is going out and selling the same thing over and over and over again. And so I guess what's interesting about the role for me is being able to have purview over all aspects of this. So we do have the repeatable sales process with consumers. We are going to partners in something of a B2B-like scenario. We're putting these two things together in some ways. The revenue team has impact on how the product evolves, how customer support happens, how the products get marketed online and talked about in content. So seeing the entire operation come together is actually probably the most interesting piece for me.
And how about like the characteristics of the salespeople and the sales process? I would think credibility, trust building, professionalism would be paramount.
All of those things absolutely matter. And then the ability to learn really quickly.
Yeah.
I call it immersive learning. They need to be able to jump into a brand new space, read, study, understand their own learning style, and then learn very quickly, and then be able to incorporate feedback from conversations and day-to-day interactions, both internally with the team and then externally on the phone or at an event with prospects or customers or partners, and improve. And they need to be able to do that on their own. They're going to get coaching from it. They're going to get coaching from me. They're going to get coaching and supervision from the rest of the team, from sales ops to some extent as well, of course. But at the same time, reps need to own this, whether they're working at our company or anyone else's out there. Immersive learning is incredibly important, especially if you're selling anything technical, anything financial, or even healthcare, health tech, any of these areas that are now merging with technology completely. Being a self-starter and a lifelong learner and an immersive learner is one of the key attributes. And then having great communication skills and being able to build trust very quickly, establish some credibility, those are all really important. And actually, to go back to what we talked about earlier, that's why we started with some very experienced people who've been in the space. It allowed us to brand ourselves that way as a company and then to put the right process in place.
Excellent, Chris. Hey, I appreciate your time today. Where do people go to learn more about your company, what you're doing, and connect up with you?
Great. So the company is Rocket Dollar. You can reach us at www.rocketdollar.com. And then they can find me on LinkedIn. It's Chris Palmisano, Palmisano. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm also on Twitter, and my handle is @Palmisano.
Yeah, I think Chris is onto something. I'm going to talk to him about taking my 401k and investing it in B2B revenue.com. I hear it's the hottest sales company and marketing company out there. But I think he's got a great idea growing that. I got to believe that that's a pretty tough challenge ahead of him. The space is noisy and crowded, and you need to clarify it. I think he's got his head on straight, and I think he's going to have a lot of success. So check out his company, Rocket Dollar, and also check out B2B revenue.com. connect up with me on LinkedIn. If you could follow the company page, B2B Revenue Leadership on LinkedIn. I put out updates there. It's a great way to keep in touch with the podcast if you don't want to either follow me or you're running out of connections. And I put out some funny videos to kind of lighten up your day. Also, make sure you check out the show notes. In the show notes, I put all the links to all our partners here, people who help support the podcast and the products that I use. I use Pipedrive every day. It's my CRM. They're moving into the enterprise space. I asked them, I had a discussion with them. They've got one account with several thousand users. That may not be big to you, but I think it's pretty big. And they've got some great capabilities about building in a cadence and actions that happen automatically, filling in company information about contacts automatically, cleaning up your database for you, connecting it up with your email box, having notifications about opens in your calendar. And you get 1 month free with the Brutal Truth coupon code, all one word, as you do with nudge.com or nudge.ai. Which one is it? So anyways, also discoverorg.com. Make sure you're checking out them if you're looking for clean, accurate data for your team. Instead of having people hunt down and correct data all the time, just have it. You got it right there. It's crazy not to be using Discover.org. They crushed it on the G2 Crowd review site. I had a guy from G2 Crowd on last week on the Brutal Truth About Sales and Selling podcast. And you can check that out. That was last week. That's it. We'll see you next time. Thanks for listening.